Hey there, before this video begins, I'd like to let you guys know that I'm trying out new styles for editing and new visual stuff, so as you can see, a little animated version of me is a new thing I'm trying out, so if you guys like it, let me know in the comments below, and let's get started! A few months ago, I was commissioned by the wonderful Tom Marshall to make somewhat of a different type of Thomas model. He wasn't really into Gauge 1, and I wasn't really used to modeling anything outside of that. And yeah, he didn't end up going for the HO scale, but he was going for something a little more practical, I'd say.
Who the fuck?
That's when he asked me if I was able to do an O-Gauge model, and I had never done something of that scale before, much less aware of the size difference between that and Gauge 1. But you know what? I understood the task at hand, and trust me, man, there's nothing that I can't do. So I gladly accepted the challenge to face this thing head on and make the very first O-Gauge Thomas. But as far as I know, this is the very first screen accurate model of an O-Gauge model, because I don't know what the hell Lionel is doing. Huge shout out to Amazing Scout on Twitter and YouTube for making the Thomas files that I graciously manhandled and mangled to be the size of O-scale, because he originally made them for Gauge 1, but you know. The model is much smaller than a Gauge 1 model, of course, as you can see here. I was able to print out pretty much what are supposed to be larger parts all at once. I printed out the body standing straight up, which was very difficult, but that's what Scout said to do, so that's what I did. While those parts were printing, I was able to print out the much smaller parts in resin because, come on now, that resin is easier for smaller parts. I'm not gonna sit here and FDM print small, like, come on now, I ain't gotta explain myself. The model was, of course, soon coated in putty and sanded and primered and puttied and sanded and primered and puttied and sanded and primered and puttied and sanded and primered and primered. I get it! The model was then put in its last coat of putty and ready to be primed once more before being water sand, and I honestly have to say that this was looking really good. I was just enjoying the charming feeling of how small this model was. It wasn't as small as HO, obviously, but it still felt really charming to just have. It felt like a little trophy almost. I don't know, I enjoyed the way this was a lot more tame than a Gauge 1 model. It wasn't before long till I had this model completely smoothed out and covered in gray primer. I, of course, was airbrushing him because it's a lot more precise, and with a smaller model, airbrushing is a lot easier, so I began to testing a few blues. And I finally settled on a blue that I thought properly represented the Season 2 aesthetic that Tom was going for. Also, I forgot to mention, he's going for Season 2 Thomas, so that's like another thing. I've never really done another classic series model, so this whole project is just new on so many different levels. Since the primer I used was pretty much already good to go for the running board tops, I quickly painted the bottom of the running board red. Subsequently, I masked off the running board and then began to paint the smokebox black. The smokebox and the frames were then painted black, and honestly, it was looking dummy crispy, if I'm being honest. It was looking so scrumptious, so delicious. I could've just taken a bite straight out of the mouth. Then immediately after the smokebox was painted black, I masked off everything and painted the body blue. And my god, this blue was perfect for Season 1 in my opinion. Or Season 2, I said Season 2, I didn't say Season 1, ignore that. After the body was fully painted, I then had the entire body sprayed in a glossy clear coat because, you know, sealing that paintwork, don't mess it up, because I swear to god, if I mess it up, I'm not repainting it. I swear, I'm not gonna repaint it. Then I let the model sit for about 2 days, and then after the 2 days were up, he was fully dried, I began to line the model. Lining the model was honestly like the easiest part because you wanna know the amount of times I've lined a Thomas model. More times than you could possibly imagine. But after the red lining, the numbers, and the yellow lining were done, I then painted up the windows, slapped him on, gave him the whistle, and he was pretty much done on the body aesthetic-wise. Now it's time to move on to the chassis. Seeing that this was an O-Gauge model, it was clearly smaller and different than Gauge 1, so Tom had a piece of O-scale track sent to me. I then used this track to test out the spacing of the wheels and make sure everything was running smoothly on the chassis. While the chassis was being made, I had a few faces that Tom wanted all printed and painted up, and I had them test sprayed in a gray that I custom made myself. That gray was a little too blue for my liking, so I repainted them in the gray that I normally use, and shaded them, and it worked out perfectly fine. Now, I'm sorry to be repeating myself like this, but this was the first time I've ever used, or I guess made, a chassis of this size, and I thought the motors I had would be small enough to fit, but of course they weren't. So I had to buy smaller motors, and my goodness, these motors were small, but they got the job done. But once the side rods were on, locked in place, the chassis rolled pretty much flawlessly. Well, it rolled flawlessly until that one time I fucked up the speed settings, but... And after the chassis was done and painted, I gave it a bottom plate and it was good. Thomas was done. This was an amazing O-Gauge model. I'm honestly proud of myself, which is something that I usually am not when it comes to my models. It's like, I look back at this model and it's hard to believe that I made something like this, and so I sent it to Tom, and let's see what he said.
That's a good idea. Oh, hi there, John. Tom Marshall here. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much for the O-Gauge Thomas. Absolutely love the model, all the work that you put into him, and yeah, I can safely say he's really happy here with me, aren't you, Thomas? But Thomas wasn't happy at all. In fact, he was a right miserable little twat. Well, I'm just recording a video. Stop being such a dick. Oh, seriously. Yeah, anyway. Thanks, John. Cheers.
I'd like to thank Amazing Scout one more time for making the files for this Thomas, and I'd like to thank Tom Marshall for pretty much giving me the opportunity to make this model that's completely different than what I'm used to. It is actually very inspiring in a lot of ways. Now your boy's on his home soil in the UK, living the best life. Well, it's been Tank Engine John, signing off.